The stars had grown silent in the outer reaches. Ambassador Vexnar of the Galactic Concordat pressed his four-fingered hands against the observation deck's cold transparisteel, his compound eyes reflecting the endless void beyond. 3,000 years of peace. 3,000 years since the formation of the Concordat, binding together the 17 sentient species of the known galaxy in harmony and mutual prosperity. 3,000 years since anyone had been foolish enough to challenge humanity. "The transmission came through an hour ago," said his aide, a young Kalafi female whose blue-scaled skin shimmered nervously under the ambient lighting. "The Vraxians have declared their intentions. They're demanding humanity's unconditional surrender." Vexnar didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at the stars, remembering the stories his grandfather had told him. Stories of fire raining from darkened skies. Stories of entire worlds reduced to ash and memory. Stories of a species so terrible in their vengeance that even the void itself seemed to recoil from their passing. "Have the humans responded?" he asked finally. "Not yet, Ambassador. Earth has gone silent." Vexnar closed his eyes. "Then it has already begun." The Vraxians had emerged from the unexplored regions beyond the galactic rim 17 solar cycles ago, their biomechanical warships cutting through space like blades through flesh. They were magnificent in their horror, towering beings of chitin and muscle, their bodies augmented with technology grown from living metal, their minds linked through a neural network that spanned their entire civilization. They had conquered 37 species before reaching the borders of the Galactic Concord. 37 civilizations reduced to footnotes in history, their survivors enslaved, their worlds stripped of resources, their cultures erased and forgotten. Supreme Overlord Krixveth stood on the command platform of the Vraxian flagship, Eternal Dominion, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction as he surveyed the holographic display before him. 200,000 warships, 50 million ground troops, weapons that could crack continents and boil oceans, technology harvested from 36 conquered civilizations, refined and perfected by Vraxian genius. "Show me their territory again," he commanded, his voice resonating through the neural link that connected him to every Vraxian mind in the fleet. The display shifted, zooming in on the spiral arm known to the Concordat as the Perseus Reach. At its heart, highlighted in blue, was a single star system, Sol. "The humans," his tactical advisor hissed, her compound eyes narrowing. "They are the dominant species of the Concordat. Our agents report that the other 16 species defer to their judgment in matters of war and diplomacy." "Dominant?" Krixveth's mandibles spread in what passed for amusement among his kind. "Look at them. A single habitable world. A population of merely 14 billion. Their technology is unremarkable. Their military forces are quaint." The display updated with tactical assessments. The human fleet numbered approximately 12,000 combat-capable vessels. Their ground forces totaled perhaps 50 million across their entire territory. Their weapons were primitive fusion warheads and kinetic accelerators, with only a handful of antimatter-based systems. "They are nothing," Krixveth declared. "A minor species that has somehow convinced the others to follow them. When we crush them, the rest of the Concordat will fall like grain before the harvester." His communications officer stirred. "Supreme Overlord, the other Concordat species have sent delegations requesting an audience. They claim to offer advice." Advice? Krixveth's amusement deepened. Very well, let them speak. It will be entertaining to hear the bleating of prey before the feast. The Concordat delegation arrived aboard a diplomatic vessel that was deliberately unarmed, a gesture of peaceful intent that Krixveth found contemptible. Ambassador Vexnar led the group, accompanied by representatives of the other major Concordat species. "You have come to negotiate your surrender?" Krixveth asked, not bothering to rise from his throne as the delegation entered his audience chamber. "We have come to offer you a warning," Vexnar said, his voice steady despite the fear that churned in his gut. "Supreme Overlord, we implore you, do not attack humanity." Krixveth's mandibles clicked. "You speak as though you are in a position to implore anything." "We speak as beings who have seen what happens when humanity is provoked." Vexnar stepped forward, ignoring the guards who shifted their weapons toward him. 3,000 years ago, my people, the Nathrani, thought as you do now. We saw humanity as weak, primitive, insignificant. And you were wrong? We were fools. Vexnar's compound eyes dimmed with ancient memory. We struck first. We destroyed their colony on Proxima III. 2 million humans, incinerated in a single orbital bombardment. We thought it would break them, force them to submit. Krixveth leaned forward slightly. What happened? "They came for us." Vexnar's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Not with fleets, though their fleets came too. Not with armies, though their armies followed. They came with something worse, something we had never encountered in all our wars of conquest." "Which was?" "Patience." Vexnar met the Supreme Overlord's gaze, and a hatred that burned cold enough to outlast the stars themselves. The Vraxian struck without warning, as was their way. 300 warships appeared in the outer reaches of the Tau Ceti system, home to the oldest human colony outside Sol. 18 million humans lived on Tau Ceti IV, a world of green forests and blue oceans, of children's laughter and the hum of peaceful industry. High Commander Zexrek led the assault force, his neural link flooding with tactical data as his fleet emerged from hyperspace. The human defensive grid was pathetically inadequate. A dozen orbital platforms, perhaps 30 combat vessels, and ground-based installations that his sensors barely registered as threats. "All units, commence bombardment," Zekrek ordered. "Leave nothing standing." The Vraxian warships opened fire in perfect synchronization, their weapons arrays blazing with destructive force that had broken worlds across 36 civilizations. Kinetic impactors screamed through the void. Plasma lances carved burning paths toward the planet's surface. Antimatter warheads detonated in carefully calculated patterns designed to maximize devastation. The human defense platforms lasted 7 minutes. The human fleet lasted 12. The ground installations stopped transmitting after 23. Zexrek watched the planet burn, satisfaction flooding through the neural link to every mind in his fleet. Already, the first invasion transports were descending through the smoke-choked atmosphere. Soon, the survivors, if any remained, would be processed and enslaved, their world stripped of everything useful before being left as a warning to others. "Report from the surface," his tactical officer announced. "Initial resistance has been neutralized. Vraxian forces are securing the primary population centers. Casualties? Negligible, High Commander. The humans fought poorly. Zexrek's mandibles clicked in disappointment. He had hoped for more sport. The conquered species had spoken of human combat prowess with something approaching reverence, but thus far the evidence suggested otherwise. Continue securing the planet. I want a full accounting of... The transmission cut off. For 3 heartbeats, Zexrek experienced something he had never felt in his entire existence. Silence in the neural link. Total, absolute isolation from the collective consciousness of his fleet. Then the stars began to fall. He saw them first on his command display. 27 hyperspace signatures materializing at the system's edge. But these weren't like any hyperspace signatures he had encountered before. They were too fast, too precise, and they registered on his sensors as impossible. Each signature indicated a mass equivalent to a small moon. "What?" he began. The first human dreadnought opened fire. The Righteous Vengeance was not a warship in any conventional sense. It was a judgment, a pronouncement, a physical manifestation of a fury that had been refined over 3,000 years of careful preparation. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the command bridge, her eyes locked on the tactical display that showed the Vraxian fleet scrambling into defensive formations. She was 63 years old, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the granddaughter of a man who had survived the Nethrani bombardment of Proxima III. She had trained for this moment her entire life, as had her father and his father before him. Every human had trained for this moment. "Fleet status," she said, her voice carrying the calm of absolute certainty. "All 27 vessels in position, Admiral," her tactical officer reported. "The Vraxian are attempting to regroup. They're requesting reinforcements." "Let them." Chen's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Begin the bombardment." The dreadnought's main weapons array came online, a spinal mount accelerator that ran the entire length of the vessel's 30-kilometer hull. It had been designed using principles that the Concordat scientists had deemed impossible, built in shipyards that didn't officially exist, powered by energy sources that had been theoretical a mere century ago. Humanity had spent 3,000 years preparing for this day. They had prepared well. The accelerator fired a single projectile, a fragment of compressed matter roughly the size of a human fist, accelerated to 98% of light speed. It crossed the distance to the Vraxian fleet in less than a heartbeat, its kinetic energy sufficient to rival a small supernova. Where High Commander Zexrek's flagship had been, there was now nothing but an expanding sphere of plasma and debris. "Target destroyed," the tactical officer announced, her voice professionally neutral despite the impossible violence she had just witnessed. "Vraxian fleet command structure disrupted. Enemy vessels they're attempting to flee, Admiral." "They won't make it," Chen said. "All vessels, commence full engagement. No survivors, no escape pods, no mercy." The 27 dreadnoughts of the first Vengeance fleet moved forward like wolves descending on a scattered herd, and the slaughter began. Supreme Overlord Krixveth received the news of the disaster at Tau Ceti in silence. The neural link brought him the final moments of 300,000 Vraxian minds, soldiers, technicians, pilots, all of them linked to his consciousness as they died. He felt their terror, their confusion, their desperate, futile attempts to understand what was happening as impossible weapons tore their ships apart. Then the link went silent, and Krixveth was alone with the implications. "Show me the tactical analysis," he commanded, his voice carrying none of its previous arrogance. His advisors complied, projecting the fragmentary data that had been recovered from the fleet's final transmissions. The images were incomplete, corrupted by the electromagnetic chaos of combat, but they showed enough. 27 vessels, each 30 kilometers in length, larger than anything the Vraxians had ever constructed, each carrying weapon systems that defied the known laws of physics, each moving with a speed and precision that suggested technology centuries beyond the Concordat's observed capabilities. "This is impossible," his tactical advisor whispered through the neural link. "Our intelligence indicated 12,000 human combat vessels, small patrol craft, defensive platforms, nothing like this." "Your intelligence was wrong," Krixveth said. "Obviously." "With respect, Supreme Overlord, our intelligence was not wrong. These vessels, they don't exist in any human records. They don't appear in any shipyard manifests. They exist," Krixveth interrupted. "We have 300,000 dead to prove it." He stared at the images, his compound eyes processing every detail. Where had these ships come from? How had the humans hidden them? And more importantly, how many more were there? A communication request interrupted his analysis. The identifier was unfamiliar, but the origin point was unmistakable. "Earth. Accept the transmission," Krixveth ordered, straightening on his throne. The holographic projector hummed to life, and for the first time, Krixveth found himself looking at a human. She was old by their species standards, her hair silver, her skin weathered by time. She wore no uniform, no insignia of rank. She sat in a simple chair in a simple room, with a single window behind her showing a blue sky and green hills. "Supreme Overlord Krixveth," the human said. Her voice was soft, almost grandmotherly. "My name is Margaret Chen. I am the speaker for humanity." "You are authorized to negotiate surrender?" Krixveth asked. The old woman smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "No, Supreme Overlord, I am authorized to deliver a warning." "A warning?" Krixveth's mandibles clicked in renewed amusement. "You destroy 300 of my ships, and you believe you are in a position to offer warnings?" "Yes," Margaret Chen said simply. "You attacked our colony at Tau Ceti. 18 million of our people lived there. When your fleet arrived, we were able to evacuate approximately 6 million to underground shelters. When your ground forces began securing population centers, we were able to rescue approximately 4 million more through tunnels and escape routes prepared centuries ago for precisely this purpose." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "That leaves 8 million of our people unaccounted for. 8 million men, women, and children, dead or worse, in the hands of your soldiers." "Casualties of war," Krixveth said, waving a dismissive hand. "You struck first by—" "I'm not finished, Supreme Overlord." The steel in the old woman's voice stopped him cold. 8 million of our people. That is the number we use to calculate our response. That is the debt your species now owes." "Debt?" Margaret Chen leaned forward slightly. 3,000 years ago, the Nethrani killed 2 million of us at Proxima 3. Our response took 7 years to prepare. When it was complete, we reduced their civilization to rubble. Every world, every station, every ship. 98% of their population eradicated. The survivors were left with nothing but the memory of what they had done and the knowledge of what it had cost them. Krixveth felt something stir in his neural link, a whisper of unease from his advisors as they processed this information. "The Nethrani are members of your Concordat now," he said. "They bow to you. They serve us," Margaret Shen corrected. "They serve us because they understand what we are, what we're capable of, what we will do if we are ever pushed again." She smiled that terrible smile once more. "Supreme Overlord, the Nethrani killed 2 million of us, and we destroyed their civilization. You have killed 8 million. Your response will be proportional. You threaten genocide? I promise justice." The old woman's eyes were cold as the void between stars. "You have 96 hours to withdraw all forces from Concord space and send an emissary to negotiate terms of reparation. After 96 hours, we will consider the failure to comply as an act of continued aggression." The transmission ended. Krixveth sat in silence for a long moment, then turned to his advisors. "What is the status of our main fleet?" 187,000 vessels are prepared for immediate deployment, Supreme Overlord. Another 13,000 can be mobilized within the time frame specified. "Mobilize everything," Krixveth commanded. "We will show these humans what happens when they threaten the Vraxian ascendancy." Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in vaults that had been constructed in the decades following the Nethrani War, the true history of humanity was preserved. Director James Okonkwo walked the silent corridors alone, his footsteps echoing against walls of reinforced metal and stone. He had been director of the archive for 37 years, appointed to the position by his predecessor, and charged with maintaining the secrets that kept humanity safe. The archive was more than a repository of information. It was a testament to what humanity had learned in the centuries since their first contact with alien civilizations, and what they had been forced to become in order to survive. James stopped before a door marked simply Prometheus and pressed his palm against the biometric scanner. The door slid open, revealing a circular chamber dominated by a holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the known galaxy. Every star was marked, every habitable world was catalogued, and beside each entry was a number, a calculated index of threat assessment that determined humanity's response should that world ever turn hostile. The Vraxian territories were highlighted in red, their threat index climbing in real time as new intelligence arrived. "Director," a voice said from behind him, "the Council is ready to proceed." James nodded, not turning from the display. "Show me the assets." The map shifted, zooming out to reveal the full extent of human preparation. What the Concordat saw, what the Vraxian had seen, was a civilization of modest means and limited military capability. A single homeworld, a handful of colonies, a fleet of 12,000 patrol vessels designed for defense rather than conquest. What the galaxy did not see was the truth. Humanity had spent 3,000 years building in secret, in shipyards hidden in the hearts of gas giants, in manufacturing facilities buried beneath the crust of dead worlds, in research stations scattered across the unexplored regions where no other species ever ventured. The 27 dreadnoughts of the First Vengeance Fleet were not an anomaly. They were a vanguard. "Total combat assets ready for deployment?" James asked. 47,000 capital-class vessels, Director. 230,000 support craft. ground forces numbering approximately 2 billion, with an additional 8 billion reserve militia capable of mobilization within 60 days. James nodded slowly. It had taken 3 millennia to build this force, 3,000 years of careful preparation, each generation adding to the legacy, each innovation refined and incorporated into the grand design. And now, at last, it would be used. What about the special projects? The display shifted again, highlighting a series of installations that existed beyond the normal chain of command. Project Prometheus, Project Lazarus, Project Judgment Day. All projects are fully operational, Director, awaiting authorization from the Council. James closed his eyes, remembering the first time he had learned the full scope of what humanity was capable of. He had been 22 years old, a junior analyst assigned to the Archive's Historical Research Division. His clearance had been low, his access limited, his understanding of the world still shaped by the peaceful fiction that humanity presented to the galaxy. Then his predecessor had shown him the truth. "The galaxy thinks we're weak," the old director had said, leading him through corridors he hadn't known existed. "They look at us and see a small, fragile species clinging to a single blue world. They see our diplomacy and our peaceful overtures, and they think they understand us." "Don't they?" James had asked. No. The old director had stopped before a door marked with symbols James didn't recognize. They see what we want them to see, what we need them to see, to keep us safe and keep them complacent. What don't they see? The door had opened, revealing a chamber filled with schematics and strategic plans that spanned centuries. War plans, contingency operations, apocalypse protocols for every conceivable scenario. "They don't see what we really are," the old director had said. "Underneath the diplomacy, underneath the treaties, underneath 3,000 years of performed weakness, they don't see the monster." Supreme Overlord Crixveth's armada departed from Vraxian space exactly 72 hours after Margaret Chen's transmission. 200,000 warships, each carrying enough firepower to devastate a world, all of them connected through the neural link in a Gestalt consciousness that functioned as a single, perfect military machine. They were the largest fleet ever assembled in the history of the Vraxian ascendancy, larger than the armadas that had conquered 37 civilizations, larger than any force the galaxy had seen in recorded memory. Crixveth stood at the center of his command sphere. His consciousness expanded through the neural link until he could feel every ship, every soldier, every weapon in his vast army. They were unstoppable. They were inevitable. They were utterly unprepared for what awaited them. The first sign of trouble came as the armada entered the outer reaches of Concordat space. Long-range sensors detected anomalous readings, gravitational fluctuations that didn't correspond to any known stellar phenomena. Crixveth ordered scouts to investigate, and when the scouts failed to return, he ordered a full tactical advance. "Supreme Overlord," his navigation advisor reported, "we are detecting additional anomalies ahead. Our sensors are showing—" "This cannot be correct." "Report," Crixveth commanded. "We are reading over 40,000 distinct ship signatures, Supreme Overlord. But our visual confirmation shows nothing. Empty space." Crixveth's compound eyes narrowed. "Explain." "I cannot, Supreme Overlord. The sensors indicate a massive fleet directly in our path, but there is nothing visible, nothing that our weapons can target." Before Krixveth could respond, space itself seemed to shimmer. They appeared all at once, thousands upon thousands of vessels, their hulls black as the void itself, their weapons arrays glowing with barely contained energy. They had been there all along, hidden by technology that the Vraxian could not even conceptualize, waiting for the precise moment to reveal themselves. And at the head of this impossible fleet was a vessel that made the 30-kilometer dreadnoughts look like patrol boats. 100 kilometers from stem to stern, its hull covered in weapons that pulsed with light older than some stars, it hung in the void like a judgment rendered in metal and fire. The final argument. This is Admiral Chen to the Vraxian Armada. A voice crackled across all channels, broadcasting in perfect Vraxian. You have entered Concordat space despite our warning. You have not withdrawn your forces from Tau Ceti. You have not sent an emissary to negotiate. Krixveth signaled his communications officer to respond. Admiral, I am Supreme Overlord Krixveth. Your warning was noted and rejected. The Vraxian ascendancy does not negotiate with... I wasn't finished, Supreme Overlord. The Admiral's voice carried the same steel as the old woman who had spoken from Earth. Your 96 hours have expired. In accordance with human law and custom, you have been judged guilty of crimes against humanity. The sentence is death. The human fleet opened fire. The Battle of the Outer Reaches, as it would later be known, lasted exactly 17 hours. 17 hours to destroy 200,000 warships. 17 hours to kill or capture 47 million Vraxian soldiers. 17 hours to prove to the galaxy that everything they thought they knew about humanity was a carefully constructed lie. Admiral Sarah Chen watched the final phase of the battle from the command bridge of the Righteous Vengeance, her face an expressionless mask as the last Vraxian formations collapsed under overwhelming firepower. Around her, tactical officers coordinated the movements of hundreds of ships with precision that approached the mechanical, their training having prepared them for this moment across generations of simulation and preparation. Supreme Overlord Krixveth's flagship has been disabled, Admiral, her tactical officer reported. He's requesting to surrender. Chen considered this for exactly 3 seconds. Grant him safe passage to the final argument. I believe Speaker Chen wishes to speak with him personally. Understood, Admiral. The battle continued around them, but it was no longer a contest. It had never been a contest. The Vraxian had entered this engagement believing themselves to be the superior force, and that belief had cost them everything. Chen thought about the history that had led to this moment, the 3,000 years of preparation, the generations of humans who had lived and died in service to a cause they would never see realized. Her grandmother had been one of them, a shipyard worker who had spent 50 years building weapons that would only be used after her death. Her father had been another, a tactical researcher who had devoted his life to studying alien military doctrines and developing countermeasures that existed only in classified archives. And now, at last, their work was complete. Admiral, her communications officer said, we're receiving transmissions from across the Concordat. The other species are. They're asking what's happening. They're requesting explanations. Tell them to wait, Chen replied. This is not over yet. Supreme Overlord Krixveth had never known defeat. His entire existence had been defined by victory over enemy species, over rival claimants to his throne, over the very concept of failure itself. The Vraxian Neuralink ensured that every member of his species shared in his triumphs, their collective consciousness elevated by each conquest. Now, that same Neuralink, flooded with the agony of 47 million dying minds, and Krixveth felt every death as though it were his own. He stood in the shuttle bay of his ruined flagship, surrounded by the handful of guards who had survived the battle, waiting for the human vessel to retrieve him. His armor was scarred and blackened, his chitin cracked in places where debris had struck him during the attack. For the first time in his life, he looked like what he was, a defeated creature awaiting judgment. The human shuttle arrived without fanfare, a small transport vessel that seemed almost insulting in its modesty. A single human emerged, a young woman in a simple uniform, her face professionally neutral. "Supreme Overlord," she said, "please come with me." Krixveth had expected many things: mockery, violence, perhaps even execution. He had not expected politeness. "You're not going to kill me?" "Not yet," the young woman said. "Speaker Chen wishes to speak with you first. After that," she shrugged, "that will depend on what you have to say." The final argument was even more impressive from the inside than it had been from without. Krixveth was led through corridors that stretched for kilometers, past chambers filled with technology he couldn't begin to understand, past thousands of human soldiers who watched him with expressions that ranged from hatred to something that looked almost like pity. Finally, he was brought to a simple room, the same room he had seen in Margaret Chen's transmission, with its window showing blue skies and green hills. But now, the window showed only the darkness of space, and the hills were replaced by the distant glow of burning Vraxian ships. Margaret Chen sat in her simple chair, looking exactly as she had in the transmission, old, weathered, grandmotherly. And utterly terrifying. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to a chair that had been prepared for his anatomy. "We have much to discuss." Krixveth sat, his compound eyes never leaving the old woman's face. "You've destroyed my fleet." "I've destroyed the forces you brought into Concordat space," Margaret Chen corrected. "Your fleet in Vraxian territory remains intact. For now." "For now?" The old woman smiled. "That depends entirely on what you choose to do next, Supreme Overlord. You attacked our colony. You killed 8 million of our people. By our laws, by our customs, by every standard we use to measure justice, your species has earned annihilation." Krixveth felt the neural link trembling with the fear of every surviving Vraxian who heard those words. "You cannot." "I can," Margaret Chen interrupted. "Let me show you exactly what I can do." The holographic display activated, showing the Vraxian homeworld, a massive planet of red deserts and towering spires, home to 17 billion of his species. Then the display zoomed out, revealing what orbited above. 300 human vessels, each as massive as the final argument, each carrying enough firepower to sterilize the planet 100 times over. "They arrived 6 hours ago," Margaret Chen said, "before you even entered Concordat space. We've had assets positioned around your homeworld for the past 3 weeks, Supreme Overlord. We could have destroyed you at any time. We chose to wait." "Why?" "Because we wanted you to understand." The old woman leaned forward. 3,000 years ago, when the Nathrani attacked us, we were genuinely unprepared. We were a young species still learning our place in the galaxy. The attack on Proxima 3 was a trauma that reshaped our civilization, not because it nearly destroyed us, but because it showed us what we were capable of becoming when pushed. She gestured, and the display shifted to show images of the Nethrani War, cities burning, populations fleeing, and finally, human warships descending on Nethrani worlds like avenging angels. We discovered something terrible about ourselves in that war. We discovered that we have an unlimited capacity for hatred, for vengeance, for cruelty. We can hold grudges across generations. We can build weapons for wars that won't happen for centuries. We can turn our entire civilization into a machine designed for the destruction of those who wrong us. Crixveth stared at the images, his neural link processing data that contradicted everything he had believed about this seemingly weak species. "The galaxy looks at us and sees a peaceful people," Margaret Chen continued, "a diplomatic people, a people who prefer negotiation to conflict. And that's true. We do prefer peace, but not because we're weak. We prefer peace because we know what happens when we choose war." The display changed again, showing the burning remnants of his fleet. "We prefer peace because if we don't, we become something that frightens even us." The negotiation lasted 3 days. Crixveth had expected to face demands for resources, territory, perhaps even population transfers. He had expected the kind of terms that the Vraxians themselves had imposed on conquered species, harsh, punitive, designed to cripple without quite destroying. What Margaret Chen offered was something far more complex. "We don't want your worlds," she explained on the second day of talks. "We don't want your resources or your technology. We don't even want your submission." "Then what do you want?" "We want you to understand." The old woman's eyes were ancient and tired. "Every species we've encountered has looked at us and seen prey. They've seen our single homeworld, our small population, our apparent lack of military capability, and they've decided we would be easy to conquer. Every single one of them has been wrong." The Nethrani. The Kalathi attempted a smaller incursion 60 years after the Nethrani War. We destroyed their military infrastructure before they could fully mobilize. The Vorax made hostile gestures in the 3rd century. We assassinated their entire ruling council in a single night. The Trinaki built a secret weapon designed to destabilize our star. We crashed a moon into their capital city before they could deploy it. Crixveth's neural link hummed with processing as he searched for records of these events. He found nothing. Not in Vraxian intelligence files, not in captured Concordat databases, not in any source he could access. Why is there no record of these actions? "Because that's how we prefer it," Margaret Chen said. "We don't want the galaxy to fear us. We don't want to be the species that conquers and dominates. We want to be left alone, to live in peace, to explore and create and grow without the constant threat of annihilation." "But you built those weapons anyway." "Of course we did." The old woman's smile held no warmth. "We built them because we learned the fundamental truth of the galaxy 3,000 years ago. Peace is only possible when you have the power to enforce it. We built them because we knew that someday someone would be foolish enough to test us again." She leaned back in her chair, and now here you are. Wow! The terms that humanity offered the Vraxians were unprecedented in galactic history. First, a complete withdrawal from all territory claimed by the Vraxian ascendancy outside their original borders. Every species they had conquered would be granted independence, with human observers to ensure the transition. Second, the complete disarmament of Vraxian offensive capabilities. Their neural-linked fleet would be dismantled, their biomechanical weapons decommissioned, their military infrastructure converted to peaceful purposes. Third, and this was the term that made Krixveth's mandibles click in confusion, education. "We're going to teach your people," Margaret Chen explained. "We're going to show them what we've learned about the galaxy, about survival, about the price of aggression. And when we're done, your species will have a choice to make." What choice? The same choice we gave the Nethrani, the same choice we give every species that attacks us and survives. The old woman's eyes held something that might have been compassion, or might have been pity. You can choose to join us, to become part of something larger than yourself, to contribute to a civilization that values creation over destruction. And if we refuse? Margaret Chen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured toward the window, which now showed the Vraxian homeworld hanging in space like a jewel against the darkness. "The alternative is extinction," she said finally. "Complete, absolute, and permanent. We will erase every trace of your civilization from the galaxy. Your worlds will be sterilized. Your technology will be destroyed. Your history will be forgotten. 1,000 years from now, no one will even remember that the Vraxian ascendancy ever existed." Krixveth stared at the image of his homeworld. 17 billion of his people. The culmination of a civilization that had risen to dominate dozens of species across a vast swath of the galaxy. All of it reduced to the choice of one individual. "The Nethrani chose to join you," he said slowly. "They did. It took them time to accept it, time to process the shame and the humiliation, time to rebuild their culture around new values. But eventually, they understood that we offered something none of their previous conquests ever had, a future." "And the ones who refused? The Kalathi, the Vorex, the others you mentioned?" Margaret Chen's expression didn't change. "They made their choice. We respected it." "By destroying them?" "By doing what was necessary to ensure our survival." The old woman rose from her chair, walking to the window to gaze out at the stars. "You see us as monsters, Supreme Overlord. And perhaps we are. But we are monsters that prefer to create rather than destroy. We are monsters that will offer you mercy even when you don't deserve it. We are monsters that have learned to contain the worst of ourselves, most of the time." She turned back to face him. "The question is whether you can learn the same lesson, or whether you will force us to become what we truly fear." Supreme Overlord Krixveth spent 18 hours in isolation, his neural link connected only to the vast collective consciousness of the surviving Vraxian. He shared with them everything he had learned, the truth about human capabilities, the terms that had been offered, the consequences of refusal. The debate that followed was unlike anything in Vraxian history. For generations, their species had defined itself through conquest. Their religion, their social structure, their very sense of identity, all of it was built on the principle that the strong dominated the weak, that expansion was the only acceptable path, that surrender was the ultimate shame. And now they faced a species that had proven itself unimaginably stronger, offering a choice that seemed to violate everything the Vraxian believed. "We should fight," some voices argued through the neural link. "Even if we cannot win, we should not submit. Death with honor is preferable to survival with shame." "There is no honor in extinction," others countered. "The humans offer us a future. Perhaps not the future we wanted, but a future nonetheless." They offer us servitude, slavery dressed in the language of partnership. They offer us what they offered the Nithrani, and the Nithrani are not slaves. They are members of the Concordat. They have rebuilt, recovered, flourished. Crixveth listened to the debate, feeling the currents of opinion as they shifted back and forth across the collective consciousness. He thought about what Margaret Shen had said, about the human capacity for hatred, for patience, for cold fury that could outlast the stars themselves. He thought about the fleet that orbited his homeworld, carrying enough firepower to end his species in a single afternoon. And he thought about something else the old woman had said, something that had struck him as strange at the time, but which now seemed to carry a weight he hadn't initially understood. We are monsters that prefer to create rather than destroy. Prefer. The word implied choice, implied that the other option, destruction, was always available, always waiting. The humans had built themselves into something capable of annihilating civilizations, and then they had chosen to use that capability as sparingly as possible. What kind of species could do that? What kind of culture could create weapons of absolute devastation and then spend 3,000 years hoping never to use them? Crixveth thought he understood now. The humans weren't weak despite their preference for peace. They were strong because of it. It took far more discipline to build a doomsday fleet and keep it hidden than it did to simply use it at the first provocation. He made his decision. Margaret Chen received the Supreme Overlord's answer in the same simple room where they had negotiated. "We accept your terms," Crixveth said. His voice carried no resentment, no bitterness, only a strange, thoughtful quality that hadn't been there before. The Vraxian ascendancy will withdraw from all conquered territories. We will disarm our offensive capabilities. We will submit to your education program. And in exchange? In exchange, we ask only one thing. Crixveth's compound eyes met Margaret Chen's gaze. Tell us how you did it. Not the weapons, not the ships. Those are merely technology. Tell us how your species learned to be this way. How you built an engine of destruction and then chose not to use it until you had no other option. Margaret Chen considered this for a long moment. That, she said finally, is a longer story than you might expect. It begins with a species that looked up at the stars and saw not threats, but possibilities. A species that dreamed of exploration, of discovery, of contact with civilizations they could learn from and share with. And that species became this? That species learned the hard way that the universe doesn't reward idealism. Margaret Chen's voice grew distant, remembering. Proxima Third taught us that some entities will see kindness as weakness and respond with violence. The Nethrani War taught us what we were capable of when pushed. And the 3,000 years since taught us something even more important. Which was? The old woman smiled, and for the first time it was a genuine expression of warmth rather than cold calculation. That being capable of terrible things and choosing not to do them is the truest form of strength. That the monsters who build weapons of annihilation and never use them are infinitely more dangerous than the ones who use them carelessly. That restraint, properly applied, is the ultimate form of power. She stood, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting or farewell. Welcome to the Concordat, Supreme Overlord. We have much to teach each other. The integration of the Vraxian into the Galactic Concordat took the better part of a century. It wasn't easy. The psychological transformation required of a species that had built its entire identity around conquest was immense. There were factions within the Vraxian who resisted, who clung to the old ways, who believed that submission to the humans was a fate worse than extinction. Some of those factions attempted rebellions. Some tried to rebuild weapons in secret. Some even made alliances with other powers beyond the known galaxy, hoping to find allies who could challenge humanity's dominance. All of them failed. The humans had anticipated every possible form of resistance, had contingency plans for scenarios that the Vraxian themselves hadn't imagined. Each rebellion was crushed with surgical precision. Each secret weapons program was discovered and dismantled before it could become operational. Each attempted alliance was intercepted and neutralized before it could bear fruit. But the humans didn't simply destroy these movements. They studied them. They learned from them. They used them as teaching opportunities, showing the broader Vraxian population what happened when old patterns of behavior reasserted themselves. You see the cost of the old ways, human administrators would explain after each failed uprising. Your compatriots chose violence, and violence was returned to them. But notice that we used only the minimum force necessary. We didn't punish the innocent for the crimes of the guilty. We didn't extend retribution to families or communities. We targeted only those directly responsible. Why? The Vraxian would ask. You have the power to destroy us all. Why do you restrain yourselves? Because we remember what we lost when we didn't, was always the answer. Because restraint is what separates us from what we could become. 30 years after the integration began, the first Vraxian was admitted to the Concordat's Joint Defense Council. Her name was Zelari, and she had been born in the aftermath of the war, raised in a generation that had never known the conquest culture of the old ascendancy. She had studied human history, learned their languages, understood their philosophies. She had come to appreciate, even admire, the discipline that allowed a species capable of galactic annihilation to choose again and again the path of restraint. "You still frighten me," she admitted to the human representatives at her induction ceremony. "Even after everything I've learned, knowing what you're capable of, there's a part of me that will always be afraid." "Good," said Admiral Marcus Chen, grandson of Sarah Chen, great-great-grandson of the survivors of Proxima 3. "If you ever stop being afraid of what we can do, you might forget why we choose not to do it." Zelari's mandibles clicked in the Vraxian equivalent of a nod. "I understand now why the other species follow you. It's not because you conquered them. It's because you proved that you could have conquered them and chose something else instead." "We didn't choose it once," Marcus corrected. "We choose it every day. Every time we're provoked, every time we're threatened, every time we're given a reason to unleash what we've built, we choose again. Some days it's harder than others." "Has there ever been a day when you chose differently?" The Admiral's expression grew distant. "Once or twice, when we had no other option, when the alternative would have meant the extinction of everyone we were trying to protect." "The species beyond the rim? The ones who made alliance with our rebels?" "Among others." Marcus's voice was flat, revealing nothing. "There are some stories we don't tell, even to our allies. Some choices we made that we'd rather not remember. But we remember them anyway, because forgetting would be dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because the moment we forget what we're capable of, the moment we convince ourselves that we're truly peaceful, that the old fury is gone, is the moment we become vulnerable. And vulnerability, for a species like ours, could mean the end of everything." 150 years after the Vraxian integration, the galaxy had changed. The Concordat now numbered 42 member species, including several that had once been clients of the Vraxian ascendancy. Human influence extended across nearly a third of the known galaxy, not through conquest, but through the gradual spread of principles that had proven more durable than any military force. Restraint, discipline, the understanding that true power came not from the ability to destroy, but from the choice not to. At the heart of the expanded Concordat, on a world that had been terraformed specifically for interspecies diplomatic functions, a new generation of ambassadors gathered for the annual summit. Among them was Kelvin, a young Vraxian diplomat who had been selected to present his species' report on integration progress. 153 years ago, he began, my ancestor, Supreme Overlord Krixveth, led the largest military force our species had ever assembled into Concordat space. He believed, as all Vraxian of his era believed, that strength meant conquest, that survival meant domination, that the only acceptable relationship between species was that of master and slave. The assembled diplomats listened in silence. This was a story they had all heard before, in different forms from different species, but it never grew old. He was wrong, Kelvin continued, not because humanity proved themselves militarily superior, though they did, decisively. He was wrong because his entire understanding of strength was flawed. He saw the humans as prey because they appeared weak. He didn't understand that their apparent weakness was itself a form of strength, a discipline that allowed them to maintain civilized relations with species they could have destroyed at any moment. Kelvin's compound eyes swept across the assembly. Today, the Vraxian are not slaves. We are not subjugated or dominated. We are partners in a civilization that values creation over destruction, cooperation over conquest. We have learned what Krixveth could not have imagined, that there is more power in choosing not to fight than in winning every battle. He paused, his mandibles clicking softly. We have learned what it means to be human. I, Ambassador Vexnar, now ancient and gray, watched the young Vraxian diplomat from his seat at the back of the assembly hall. He remembered the day, over a century and a half ago, when he had stood before Krixveth and tried to warn him of what humanity was capable of. He had been afraid then, terrified of what would happen if the Vraxian provoked the sleeping monster that humanity had become. Terrified that the galaxy would be consumed in fire, that billions would die, that civilization itself would be swept away. Some of those fears had proven justified. The Vraxian fleet had been destroyed. Their empire had been dismantled. Their culture had been forcibly transformed. But it had not been the apocalypse he had expected. The humans had destroyed the Vraxian military, but they had rebuilt their civilization. They had stripped them of their weapons, but they had given them new purposes. They had demanded submission, but they had offered partnership in return. It was, Vexnar reflected, a very strange kind of monster that preferred to create rather than destroy. "You're thinking about the old days," a voice said beside him. Vexnar turned to find a human woman sitting next to him, young, dark-haired, wearing the simple uniform of a Concordat diplomatic aide. She looked familiar somehow, though he couldn't place her features. "I am," he admitted. "I was remembering the fear, the certainty that everything was about to end." "My great-great-grandmother felt the same way," the woman said. "She was on Tau Ceti IV when the Vraxian attacked. She was one of the 6 million who made it to the underground shelters." "I'm sorry," Vexnar said automatically. "Don't be. She survived, had children, grandchildren. I'm proof that your fear, and hers, was not the end of the story." The woman smiled. "That's the lesson, isn't it? Every species that looks at humanity expects the story to end in destruction. And sometimes it does, for those who push us too far, who leave us no other choice. But for everyone else, there's a future." Exactly. The woman stood, preparing to leave. "My grandmother used to say that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't our dreadnoughts or our spinal mount accelerators. It was our ability to imagine something better, and to build it, even when we had every reason to choose annihilation instead." She walked away, leaving Vexnar alone with his thoughts. He looked up at the assembly hall, at the representatives of 42 species gathered in peace, and he allowed himself a small moment of wonder. The galaxy had changed. A monster had chosen mercy. And somehow, against all odds, the story had continued. The stars remained silent in the outer reaches. Not because there was nothing there. The human sensor networks had long ago mapped every celestial object within 1,000 light-years of Concordat space. Not because there were no threats. The galaxy remained full of dangers, from rogue asteroid clusters to the occasional emergence of hostile intelligences from the unexplored regions. The stars remained silent because nothing dared to break that silence. Word had spread, in the centuries since the Vraxian War, to every corner of the galaxy and beyond. Word of a species that appeared weak but carried power beyond comprehension. Word of a civilization that preferred peace but was capable of absolute destruction. Word of a monster that chose mercy, but only once. In the depths of space, young civilizations reaching the cusp of interstellar capability looked toward the region known as the Concordat and made their calculations. They weighed the potential rewards of conquest against the documented consequences of aggression. They studied the fates of the Nethrani, the Vraxian, and the unnamed others who had pushed humanity too far. Most of them chose diplomacy. The few who did not, their stories ended quickly and quietly, in the spaces between stars where no observers would carry word of their destruction. Human forces appeared without warning, struck with overwhelming precision, and vanished before anyone could determine they had been there at all. It was, the galaxy had learned, simply the nature of things. The humans were not evil. They were not aggressive. They were not expansionist. But they were patient. And they never forgot. On Earth, in a chamber that had been constructed in the aftermath of the Nethrani War and expanded countless times since, a new generation of directors maintained the archive that held humanity's true history. Director Amelia Chen, distant descendant of admirals and speakers, great-great-great-granddaughter of survivors, stood before the vast display that showed every star system, every species, every potential threat in the known galaxy. Her predecessor had shown her this display 60 years ago, just as his predecessor had shown him, and his predecessor before that. The chain stretched back 3,000 years, an unbroken line of guardians maintaining vigil over the capabilities humanity had built and the restraint they struggled to maintain. "The Concordat Council is meeting tomorrow," her aide reported. "There's a new species requesting admission, the Vrelkai, from the Outer Rim. Initial contact suggests they're peaceful, technologically advanced, culturally sophisticated." And their military capabilities? Minimal. They've never developed significant weapon systems. They evolved on a world with no major predators and never developed the competitive instincts common to most species. Amelia nodded slowly. Interesting. A species that never learned to fight. They're fascinated by humanity, apparently. Our cultural exports have reached their civilization, and they're particularly interested in our entertainment media. Our stories of conflict and resolution, of monsters that choose mercy. What do they think we are? They think we're extraordinary, a species that developed the capacity for incredible violence but chose, against all evolutionary pressure, to pursue peace and cooperation. The aide smiled. They think we're the most hopeful species in the galaxy. Amelia turned back to the display, her eyes tracing the highlighted regions that showed the extent of human influence. 42 species, bound together not by conquest, but by choice. Trillions of sentient beings living in peace because humanity had made it possible. And beneath that peace, hidden in shipyards and research stations, and vaults like this one, weapons that could end civilizations. Technologies that could crack planets and boil stars and erase species from existence. 3,000 years of preparation for wars that might never come. Tell the Council we support the Vrelkai's application, Amelia said finally. They sound like they'd make good neighbors. And if they're not what they seem? Amelia Chen, director of the archive, guardian of the contingencies, smiled a smile that her distant ancestors would have recognized. Then we'll deal with it, she said, one way or another. The stars remained silent, and humanity kept watch.